Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Quantum Healthy Podcast. Today, we have a very special guest, Jim Laird, and he is an experienced strength and conditioning health coach. And since 1997, he has empowered clients from diverse backgrounds to achieve their goals, from everyday individuals to professional athletes, including the NFL, the CFL, the LPGA, and Major League Baseball. Jim helps clients unlock their potential. Myself. He's renowned for delivering exceptional outcomes efficiently and focusing on optimal health along with strength. Now, his motto is training smarter, not harder. Jim's approach has earned praise from experts. Partnering with Dr. Leland Stillman at Stillman Wellness, he brings a very unique coaching style that combines fitness, nature, and outdoor activities for overall well-being. And he's actually recently moved to Nicaragua, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about and touch on, and built a gym on the beach to allow people to focus their strength in the environment that is way more healthy than being inside of a gym. So, welcome, Jim.
Yes, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
So let's take you back to Edmonton, you're a kid. How do you go from there? We'd love to just hear your journey and any insights
Sure.
that you can share along
Yeah.
the way to now, helping men 40 plus kind of regain their health
Yeah,
and vitality.
a lot has changed. I do have a men's group, but by popular demand, I had a ton of women reach out and go, "I want to work with you too." So, and that's traditionally been the client that I've worked with, is hard charging women that just really have a hard time finding balance. So I'm starting a women's group here as well. But yeah, I was in Edmonton, and I played all the sports, and I really I was a wrestler, a football player, played hockey too, but I just fell in love with football. And I really wanted to play college football in the US. So I ended up moving to California, to Redding, California, where I actually met Rob Wolf before he was Rob Wolf.
Okay.
And yeah, that's kind of how I got down into the States. And that's kind of how that happened.
For those listening that might not know Rob Wolf, I have his book here. I'll just show it real quick.
Yeah. Wired to Eat and the Paleo Solution.
Yeah.
He owns that Element. He's been a good friend of mine for a long time.
Is that Element Tea?
Yeah, he owns that.
Ah, I never knew that. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So okay, take us from meeting Rob Wolf, and where'd
Well,
you
I,
go
I
from there?
played 1 year of college football in California, which I played at a junior college. This was before the internet was really big, so I really didn't know much about how college football worked. And so I played there, and then I ended up going to Liberty, which is in Virginia. So I went from, Canada, Edmonton, it rarely gets over 80 degrees, 85 degrees,
Yeah.
to living, practicing in 110 degree heat. And that was before they have rules now in the NCAA, or once it goes over a certain temperature, they have to cancel practice. But that wasn't the case when I was down there. So that was a huge culture shock. I didn't know anybody when I moved there. And then when I moved to Virginia, I didn't know anybody there either. And then so I played football there, and that's where I fell in love with the way I'd already started lifting. And I've talked about my childhood and how I use sports. I didn't have the greatest childhood, so I was using sports as a way to kind of deal with some of my anger issues. And when I was acting out in school, the teachers were like, they were just like, put him in sports. Like, instead of investigating, like, why is this kid acting this way? They suggested I played sports. And of course, I went into football and wrestling, and I started knocking the crap out of people, and everybody's like, "Yay, that's really good." So, and then the weight room became an outlet for my anger and my rage. And so when I went to Liberty, I didn't really know that there was this thing that you could get paid to coach weightlifting, right? And that's where after my football career kind of ended, mainly because I was too caught up in the lifting part of it. It actually affected my ability to play football. I was just so obsessed with lifting heavier weights. I ended up getting injured from lifting, and that affected my ability to play. But after that, I worked there as a strength and conditioning assistant coach for a couple years, and then I was going to Aspen in the wintertime and in the summer to work, because I'm dual citizen. I have both citizenships. So instead of going home to Canada, the universities in Canada let out earlier. So by the time I'd get home, all the jobs are gone. Plus, the exchange rate at the time was god awful. So I worked in Aspen. And so I would go back and forth. And then I ended up going to Tucson. I worked as a GA at the University of Arizona. So I moved somewhere else where I didn't know anybody. This is a common theme here. And then I ended up moving to Kentucky because of a friend of mine who I met at Arizona. His name is Jim Windler. He wrote a book called 531. which is kind of one of the big strength training books in the, in the last like 10 years. And so he moved to do a GA at Kentucky. And this was right around 9/11. And I ended up moving to Kentucky on the day 9/11 happened, or the day after. So I'm driving across the country in a Lincoln Continental car, a one-way rental, and there's nobody on the road. It was pretty interesting. But I got to Kentucky. My plan was, I didn't know what I was going to do, because I could have gone back to Aspen, but nobody was flying, nobody was traveling, and Aspen's a big tourist place. And so there wasn't much going on there. I worked at a 5-star hotel there, which I think is part of the reason that makes me such a great coach, because, I mean, I guess I could call myself a great coach. Some people have said that, but being in the customer service industry, working in bars and nightclubs, dealing with difficult people, dealing with different personalities, being able to, serve people essentially was a skill that I acquired from that I was able to transfer over into coaching people, because it's essentially a customer service business. And, so I went to Kentucky and I ended up just staying there, and I started training people on my own. And that's kind of how I ended up in Kentucky, and, ran into some health issues later on. One time in '08, got ulcerative colitis. And that's when I got into Rob's stuff and into Paul Check's stuff, and made some lifestyle changes to manage that. And then later on, the side effect of being inside a gym from 5 a.m. till 8 p.m, I had some other health challenges that got me into the quantum world, which brought the sunlight and outdoor stuff as part of it, which was missing because I was just inside from 5 a.m. till 8 p.m. So that's kind
How
of
did you find that? Like, what did that, did you read something or a
well,
podcast?
I'm the kind of person that I have to fall flat on my face in order to learn. Like I crash my car at high speeds. Like that's just how I operate. Like I'm very stubborn. In '08, I was powerlifting. I was, on performance enhancing drugs. I was taking stimulants. I was just
Oh,
pushing and
wow.
pushing. I was working 12, 14 hours. I was listening to a lot of different things. I was listening to Rob's podcast, and I never really, and a lot of it was to pass information on to my clients.
Mhm.
And then I remember I set like a huge bench PR. And this is the thing that people don't realize. You can be setting records performance wise while your health goes down the toilet. And I remember 2 days after I set this massive bench PR, I'm in the bathroom bleeding,
Oh,
and I was like, whoa, that really got my attention. When you're going to the bathroom for hours and blood's just coming out, it's like, maybe we need to make a few changes. And I started really diving into, I just got on Google and and I would do this with all my clients. If somebody had arthritis or they had pain or whatever, I would start researching why and how, and we would start attacking things from that angle. And I read down the autoimmune disease. I read down the list of causes, and it was like stress, could be a car wreck, relationship breakup. I'd had both of those things like 2 months before it happened, lack of sleep, stress. And I was just going down the list, and I checked off every box, sometimes 3 times. And then Paul Check said, in order to work out, you've got to work in. And I was just like, wow. I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, so I thought a day off of training was a day off. Well, no, it's not. When you're working a 12, 14-hour day, that's not a day off. And so I was never sitting still. I was always going. I was drinking energy drinks throughout the day to prop myself up. I remember I would take naps in the afternoon because I didn't sleep, and people could hear me snoring. Like I'd sleep in the aerobics room on like the hard floor, and people could hear me snoring like out in the main area of the gym. I was not in a good place. And so I immediately was like, wow, I need to, I started looking down, what's good for autoimmune disease, acupuncture, stress management. I started getting into float tank, and I just realized like I could not sit still. Like I literally would sit and my foot would be going up and down and I'd be twitching, and I just couldn't calm my mind. It took me like a year to finally calm my mind. And then I figured out that a lot of this going was me just pushing crap into the closet. Just like, I don't want to deal with my past trauma. I don't want to deal with everything I've been through. I'm just going to keep training, and I'm just going to push it into the closet. And eventually the closet spills out, and I had to do some inventory. And I remember when I first started sitting quietly and calmly, be still and know, a lot of the stuff that I needed to deal with started bubbling up. And part of it was forgiving some people from my past. And I started doing that, and it was like this massive weight was lifted off my shoulders. And I was like, wow, this is crazy. And I actually didn't want to train anymore because I only really knew to train
Wow.
being hateful and aggressive. And I didn't train because I loved myself. It was almost like abuse, and it took me 6 months to a year to learn how to train because I loved and loved my valued myself. So that was a huge change for me. And there was all sorts of crazy stuff going on at the time. And I got myself in a good place. I pulled gluten out of my diet. I used low doses of nicotine. I saw on PubMed that nicotine was like 85-90% effective at calming colitis flare up. So I got myself in a better place and started really talking to clients about rest and getting outside and doing all those things, and or not getting outside so much. It was like walk outside, relax. I wasn't the outside part of it wasn't really in the picture. I did like fishing and stuff, but I didn't really connect the dots on that until later. But I started talking about stress management with my clients, particularly most of my clients were type A people like me. And I just started seeing people get much better results when they made appointments to go to float tanks, or they got massages, or they started doing like binaural beat stuff. I just started noticing that, and it really helped with emphasizing that in my practice. Really helped.
I've had the privilege of doing a float tank twice.
Hmm.
What I think
Yeah.
is a float tank. It's called Cala at
Yeah.
this Nordic spa. And
Hmm.
I I've gone with my husband both times, and you kind of float away. And sometimes, we usually are touching, our hands are touching.
Hmm.
Sometimes I'll lose him or whatever, but you could care less if someone bumps into you while you're in that. And
Yeah.
I can't even pull myself out. I feel like it's the closest thing to being in the womb is what I've come to. And I just,
That's in, and with my hard charging executives and stuff that are working a lot, I'm just like,
mm,
look, you can buy yourself some forgiveness by going and doing this 1 hour a week. You're in law school right now, you're in medical
mhm,
residency. Like, we can buy some forgiveness with doing these float tank because you shut completely off. And if you can truly, and I started to love, I got the same kind of euphoria out of relaxing as I did out of training hard. But I had a float tank in my gym, and one time I made the mistake of floating like in between. I actually slept a couple times overnight in one, but I made the mistake of, I figured out that 15 minutes was the right time to do in between, like I'd have a break around noon till about 3. I figured out 15 minutes was the right time because one time I did a 90-minute float and I was so stoned and so relaxed I couldn't coach. Like, I literally could
yeah.
not coach. And so I figured out that, I needed to do it in the evening. Same with like restorative yoga. I started doing restorative yoga
Wow.
because it was great, propping yourself up in different. I tell people that can't access a float tank, or maybe it's a little too expensive for them to do something like that, where you're propping you up in different positions and making you breathe. And I noticed that if I did that like in the morning or in the afternoon, like before I had to do any work, it made me so relaxed I couldn't function. So that was something, I kind of learned about myself. But the float tank's great, and a lot of people when they get in it, they get anxiety because they don't know what to do with the silence. They don't know what to do with the stillness. And I think that's probably one of the number one things that people really struggle with today, because they're always on their phone. They're always,
Mhm.
they're always doing something, and they just have totally lost the art of being silent.
I've heard you talk about silence and how important silence is.
Yeah, I think it's the reboot on the hard drive. I mean, really,
Wow.
honestly,
Wow.
in Psalms it says, "Be still and know." I mean, if you look at, Jesus, he went off into nature by himself on a regular basis. So obviously, if it was important enough for him to do, that's probably something we should do as well.
It's been personally a challenge. My husband's really picked up on that I'm on the go. Like I love podcasts. I'm addicted to learning.
Yeah,
And
sure.
yes, I'm walking dogs and I'm listening to podcasts, but I had my own little journey this summer where I broke my tibial plateau, and
Hmm.
that I got some silence out of that. I think the good Lord maybe, made it happen for me. I
I,
guess
I always tell people, if you're not willing to change on your own, you'll be made to, and it's
well,
much
yeah.
easier to change on your own than to be made to. But sometimes that's the only way we learn. Some people need to crash and burn before they make changes. I'm definitely in that camp.
Same. Well, Andeea, are you with us?
Yeah, I would say that I, being a person in recovery, for sure.
Yeah. The body keeps the score, Jim. You've
Mhm.
talked about this book. I have not
Yeah.
read it. Andeea, have you read it?
Yeah, I listened to it and it was in my master's degree for addiction counseling. Yep. So it was
It,
some time ago, but it's very good.
it's you have to really be when you go to read it or listen to it, it's insane because I almost got sick. I've seen some, I've seen some pretty crazy things. I did some high end security work for a while, so I'm no choir boy. I've seen some pretty, and I bounced in bars from the time I was 17 until I was in my 30s. So I've seen some pretty wild things. That book will make you physically ill if you're not ready. Some of the stuff that these people went through, I'm like, how do you survive that? So it was very comforting to me to see the trauma that these people and how they were able to overcome it. But also, like, I always struggled with certain habits and behaviors that I just could not beat. And I was like, why do I keep doing this stuff? And it's like coping mechanism, coping mechanism, coping mechanism, coping mechanism. And once I understood that, hey, these are things that are just a natural part of particularly childhood trauma, things that happen to you when you're in your development years, it was nice because I come from a fairly religious family, and so you're feeling guilty about it and you're beating yourself up, and it's not a free pass. And a lot of the things are not good for me. Well, most of them weren't. But understanding that, hey, this is just something normal that the body does to kind of compensate for these things, it made it a lot easier for me to manage that. Because when these things would bubble up, I'm like, well, yeah, okay, I haven't dealt. And then when I got into the EMDR and unpacking a lot of these things and having to let them come out and actually express it and then deal with it and then reprogram myself, it made it a lot easier to work through.
EMDR, some people may not know what that is that are listening. Can you, and why was that post concussion that you
Yeah,
started that?
I really had been I'd been looking into it for a long time, and I originally started doing. I was in a car accident when I moved to Florida, and I couldn't walk or talk really well for about a month and a half, and I rehabbed myself, and I was still having problems sleeping, and I'd had success with neurofeedback in the past, which is kind of like they map your brain, and my brain tends to get stuck in like a kind of a high rev pattern, and it had helped me kind of reset and allow my brain to kind of relax. And the same goes for breathing too. You can be stuck in a breathing pattern that where your body's revved up and it doesn't really like. It's kind of like driving on the autobahn. Like you're on the autobahn, you're driving 180 kilometers an hour, and then all of a sudden you pull off the autobahn and you go through a school zone. Like that doesn't feel very good when you've been driving 180 and now you got to drive 20 kilometers an hour. It's just like, ah. So the neurofeedback kind of like, it kind of reteaches your brain to kind of be okay with being off and relaxed. And I started doing the neurofeedback and it was working really, really well. And then there was some things in the media that came out that kind of reminded me of some things that I went through when I was doing bodyguard work. And my therapist or guide or whatever you want to call her, she was looking at my brain map and she's like, what happened? And I was like, well, I haven't been sleeping well because I'm having these flashbacks from this and this and this. And she's like, you really need to do EMDR. Because when she did my original brain map, she's like, holy crap. She's like, what happened to you? Have you been like in a war zone? Like the whole backside of my brain was just lit up. And she's like, you've been through some serious trauma. And I was like, yeah, pretty much. And so we started unpacking doing the EMDR. And she's like, the reason that you're struggling right now is because the car accident basically lowered your body's ability to handle a lot of this stuff that you have dumped in your brain. And that trauma is your brain and your body's not handling it well because the brain is not functioning as well as it usually does. And so we started ungluing a lot of that, and I started really making a lot of progress in my sleep, and along with some other modalities, it really helped kind of speed my process up of recovering from the brain injury. So I with people that really are struggling, I usually start asking questions, particularly exercise addiction. I deal with a lot of people with exercise addiction, and most of the people that are either anorexic or exercise addiction, they usually have some sort of trauma that they're medicating themselves with exercise. Just like with sports, I found something deemed positive by society to manage my issues, and so anything can become a problem if it's done to excess.
Laura, that stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. That's what the
Thinking.
EMDR stands for.
Thank you.
Um, Yeah, I've done it as well, and my husband is licensed in it. It's a very, very good modality for treating trauma.
Yeah, and I had a really good therapist. She saw right through me, and like I'd been in counseling my whole life essentially, and most of the counselors were like pointing the finger at me that I was the problem in the family. And so I was really good at like messing with people like counselors and psychologists, and like I literally got fired many times because I would like spin it around on them, or I'd play mind games with them, and not intentionally, but just as a self-defense mechanism, because I had a lot of counselors that just really didn't do the due diligence of really, you're 14, you're 12, 11, 12, 13 years old, and they're blaming you for what's going on in a family. It's like, really? Like you're blaming an 11-year-old kid for everything that's happening here? And so that was a defense mechanism. I would literally just spin them around and just play with their head. And this lady, I started doing that to her, and she's like, no, 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 no. You're not doing that to me. She's like, so she put me in my place, and she was very good for me. She was very stern. I needed that. I needed somebody to kind of grab a hold of me. And she's like, I understand why you're trying to do this to me, but you can't do that anymore. She's like, you need to actually take ownership of yourself and actually deal with the issues instead of deflecting and, playing all these games with me. She's like, I'm not going to put up with that bullshit. So that was good.
Making me think of Rudy Nassif. I don't know if you know Rudy. He's the CEO of VivaRays.
Yes, I
Blue
do. I
blocking.
do. I
Yeah,
know.
I got the glasses on right now. No, just his childhood, he talks about being in blue lit classrooms and just wanting to, run out the door and run to the beach,
Yeah.
and wonder how
Yeah.
much that played in your, in child. Maybe you were more sensitive to the lighting and
Maybe, I don't know. I mean, I spent a lot of time outside. I
you
mean,
did.
I grew up at a time when we played constantly outside, and when I grew up, like it was Space Invaders and like
Mm.
Pac-Man, and like you could only play those games so much. And unlike today, like I remember like you'd stay home on a Saturday and watch cartoons all day, and you
Mhm.
just feel horrible, like horrible. You'd feel
Yeah.
terrible. You'd feel tired. You'd feel
Sluggish.
yucky. Yeah. And you're like, why did I do that? And so you would go outside, and you'd go
Mhm.
play. And whereas today, these kids, they've had a screen since they were like 2
Oh.
or 1. And so they don't know what it's like to actually feel good. They only know what the screen does for them. And so,
Mhm.
I think I got away with being a zoo animal for a
Mhm.
long time. I struggle with a lot of things, but I mean, when you're young, when you're in your 20s, you can get away with a lot more. And I spent so much time outside when I was younger. I think it kind of built my redox up enough. But then eventually in my 30s, I hit the wall, and that's when I ended up getting in big trouble with from a pedicure. But children, particularly if they live an outdoor life when they're younger and they play a lot, they're very, very resilient.
I'm not a pedicure fan. What went wrong in the pedicure?
Well, so it was around, I can't remember exactly what year it was, but this is what got me into the quantum world. And so I was working, I had a very successful gym. My business partner and we were putting on the first seminar for essentially for women for strength training. Like my big thing was getting women to quit running marathons and things like that, and to get
Oh,
more into lifting weights.
okay.
And so we've had this like seminar with like 200 people at the Hyatt. I think it was the Hyatt in Lexington. That was going on, and the lady friend that I had at the time, she's like, I'm in a gym all day, I'm sweating, my feet, probably not the most aesthetically pleasing feet you've seen. I'm definitely not a foot model. And so she's like, you need to get a pedicure or some things are going to stop. And I was just like, being a dude, it's like, well, if I have to, go get a pedicure for certain things to continue, then I'm probably going to do that. So I go to get the pedicure, and 4 days later, I'm in the ER preparing to have my leg amputated. I had gotten a staph infection, and they were able to, you're in trouble when they call in all the interns to look at you, like, look at this guy, like, luckily they were able to, and I'm in this treatment room at the infectious disease center, and I'm next to people that have diabetes that are getting everything cut off, and they're giving them Cokes and stuff. And I'm just like, wow. So I'm in there, and they were able to get it under control with antibiotics, luckily. But the caveat was they were like trying to get me to do an oral antibiotic, and they were trying to get me to rub all this crazy stuff all over my skin because they're like, this is going to come back. And this time it's not going to be in your leg. It's going to be full body, and it's going to be flu-like symptoms with no respiratory. So you're going to feel like you have the flu, but there's going to be no respiratory symptoms. And they had me on a list of like people that were let into the emergency room quickly, because I remember the first time it came on, I was feeling kind of goofy. It's like, I don't feel good. So I looked at one of my assistant coaches. I said, hey, I'm going to go to the hospital. And luckily, it was only 10 minutes down the road. By the time I got to the hospital, my fever was very high, like 104, 105. There was gorillas running up and down the street. And so I finally get in there. They put me in an alcohol bath. They give me IV antibiotics, and they got me under control. But I would go septic, every couple months. And this was happening, time and time again. And I happened to be at a Paleo FX, and I listened to Dr. Cruz speak, and he made a lot of people mad, and which is pretty common. And I was like, I need to get to know this guy. And so I became kind of friends with him, acquaintances with him. I joined his group. I hired him for a couple consults, and he was like, okay, so tell me what's going on. I told him about, my infections. And he's like, dude, like, tell me about like what you do. I'm like, I'm a strength coach. He's like, what time you start work? I'm like, 5. It's like, what time you done? I'm like, 8 o'clock. He's like, do you ever see the sun? I'm like, no, I get up at 5, I go to work, and then, I basically go home when the sun's down. And when I do go outside, I wear sunglasses. My eyes water when I'm in the sun. And he's like, dude, you do know the immune system runs you're like, the sun runs your entire immune system, your hormones, everything is run by the sun, and you're a zoo animal. I was like, okay. So he's like, you need to fire your morning clients. You need to spend time in the sun in the morning. You need to get out in the afternoon. And he's like, eventually you need to move south. Right. I was like, okay. So I fire all my morning clients. My clients are pissed. I start spending time outside, and I put red lights in my gym. I kept the doors open as much as I could. I put some dark lights, purple lights in the ceiling to get some UV, to make it a little more like sunlight inside. And ever since I did that, I've had 2 minor hiccups in the last 10 years. But since I started taking my light environment seriously, I haven't. And a lot of the digestive issues that I had before, I was very gluten sensitive. That all went away once I started taking my light seriously. Wow. So that was, that really kind of like perked my interest into moving south. And so, yeah, that's kind of how like getting outside pretty much, saved my life. So
that is no joke. We had a fellow hockey mom for a season, sat on the bench with her. She got septic, and she told us this story that they gave her a choice. It was her legs or her arms. And she chose to keep her arms, and that saved her life. And so she had no legs. And yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was getting to the point where the vancomycin wasn't working anymore. Like, yeah, it kind of gets your attention really quickly.
Sure does. Yeah.
And so, that was a big thing. And so, I started making the plans to open an outdoor gym. I've had some kind of side track stuff with that, but, then I moved to Florida, and, was working at a gym there. And then I got in an accident. I started working with Dr. Stillman just before I got in the accident. And then, for the last 3 years, I've been helping Dr. Stillman install coaching into his medical practice.
Just for people listening, Dr. Stillman, we haven't had him on yet. Dr. Stillman, if you're listening, we're waiting for you to say yes. But
he's about to have his wife's about to have a baby here soon. So he's a little overwhelmed at the moment. So.
That makes our day to hear this. That's great news. Yeah, but just Stillman Wellness, right? And he's incredible.
Stillman MD. He's actually going to be focusing more on the medical side. So if you're in Florida, you can go and see him. But yeah, he so I started working with him, and he was like, I was like, how often do you check on these people? He's like, well, I run them through, I tell them what to do. And I was like, do you check and see if they actually do it? And he's like, not really. And so I'm like, it's the follow-up and the coaching that really gets the results, right? And so we started coaching people and, installing like the 5 fundamental habits, and we noticed like a humongous difference in the outcomes, and really that's what happens. A doctor, and a lot of the doctors don't give the right advice anyways. But even if they do, they like say, okay, do this, this, and this, and then we'll see you in 6 months. And it's like, half the people, don't even do it. It's like, I remember getting on some of the calls at first, and Dr. Stillman would be like, did you get into EMFs? Did you get into all this other stuff? And I'm like, well, they haven't walked outside yet at all. So I'm not even going to worry about the EMFs until they walked outside 3 times a day.
Yeah.
And so making sure we don't overwhelm people with information. and then making sure we get habits established before we dump more things on people. And, it's really interesting. I've been looking back at my career, and yeah, getting outside is important. Some people need it more than others. Some people just need to get outside 10 minutes a day and they do great. I've had people with extreme digestive issues just chew their food. They sit down, they put their phone down, they take a few breaths and they listen to they calm themselves down and they chew their food and they actually slow down and be present, and all their digestive issues go away. So everybody's a little bit different. This is a really couple interesting anecdotes that I've kind of discovered here. I remember, because when I was in Jack's group, it's like EMF is evil, which I don't think it's the greatest thing ever. And then, living in the countryside is the best. And I remember when the beer bug hit, I owned property on a farm, which had no electricity and there was no cell phone reception. And I was like, this is great. My health is just going to go through the ceiling. I'm going to be amazing. This is going to be great. So I moved out to the farm. A couple days was good. Week 1 was okay. And then in week 2, I really started to struggle. I started getting depressed. Even though I was spending all my time outside all day, I was doing manual labor. I started craving. I would drive to the town and go through the Dairy Queen drive-through. I was drinking wine, which I usually don't do. The social connection, I had no social connection. And I was miserable. Absolutely. Thinking like, I'm in this pristine environment, no Wi-Fi, no electricity at all. I'm living like, our ancestors, so to speak.
Right.
I'm going to be in amazing health. The mental, there's a book called The Great Cholesterol Myth that I've given to all my older clients, particularly those in chronic pain. And they talk about a community in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, that was a mining town, like a steel mill town. And everybody smoked, everybody drank, they all ate like garbage, and they didn't have a lower life expectancy. And they're like, what's going on here? They smoked. They had they found the variable was the community. They all went out to the bars together. They all had great community. So, and I've actually discovered this. I have an Aura ring, which a lot of people kind of poo-poo in the quantum world too. I have it because I can wear it in airplane mode. The little bit of green light that I get is offset by the fact that I know that I'm under a lot of stress and I have to manage my stress. So that for me, but I've got 8 years of data, right?
Wow.
I sat down the other day and went through. So I've been working virtually now for 3 years. Before that, I was training about 8 to 10 people an hour, 4 to 6 sessions a day at the gym. I'm a little older now, but I discovered my stress levels are chronically higher now that I work virtually than they were when I was training 4 to 6 sessions in person. Because I think the manual labor part of it and the community part of it, the fact that I was, interacting with people in person, when I'm on this call with you, I have to do a lot of mouth breathing because I'm doing a lot of talking. I have to be animated. I have to be entertaining. People are not going to listen to me if I'm just kind of like ho-hum, whatever. If I do 4 to 6 calls in a day on the computer where I'm having to talk most of the time and I'm totally focused, and even though I'm outdoors, I'm still in front of the screen, I'm exhausted. When I would do 4 to 6 sessions in person, I'm putting weights away, I'm moving around, maybe I'm coaching somebody for a couple seconds. Most of the people that I've worked with have been with me for 10 or 15 years. I can take a mental break. I can walk up front because FedEx needs me to sign for a package, and I'm picking smart exercises for my people so I don't have to worry about them exploding or dying when I go up front. And so my level of stress in my sleep was way better than it is here in Nicaragua. And I notice when I go to Panama City, and this is going to throw a wrench in the whole thing, I sleep better in a 12-story hotel with air conditioning than I do here in Nicaragua.
With the white noise?
I don't know. I have a fan. I don't have air conditioning. I have a fan. I think part of it is that it's more comfortable. There's a lot more people around. I mean, I have friends here and I have a social life. I don't know what it is. So I'm just, the only reason I'm putting it out there is I'm like, yes, light was very important for getting me in the right place. And it's one of the reasons I'm still here. But don't think that moving to the equator or, making a dramatic change is going to solve all your problems, because there's more variables to the human experience than just light alone. It's like a plant. It needs water. It needs the right soil. It needs, not too much sun, the right amount of sun. How much sun, how much light do I need to be healthy is going to be a lot different than someone who's of African descent, right? So I'm probably in an environment in Nicaragua where I'm probably getting too much light, right? I'm getting too much sun for my body, right? Maybe, I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there.
Well,
You
that's
don't- you
the
never know.
thing. People get so black and white with the thinking. So, oh, I haven't been doing the light, so I'm going to focus on the light.
No,
And then they,
it's this absolutist thing where it's like, if you don't do this, you're gonna fail.
Mhm.
right.
The human body is highly adaptable and multifactorial. You can't
Mhm.
just say this is the true answer. Now, that's why we have the 5 fundamental habits. Get outside 3 times a day, walk, breathing through your nose in a relaxed state, eat a protein at every meal, drink high quality water, get the lights off at night, have community, have social life. These things are all important.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You could have
Balance.
you could have 4 of them right, and the social life is not there. There's that one dude that lived in Alaska by himself for like 30 years, and I guess he made friends with the animals and stuff. There's certain people that can handle that. I'm not one of those people. I'm more of a loner. I have a lot of acquaintances. I have a few really good friends, but I need to have social interaction. And so everybody's some people, I've got people that work in an office building all day that I've worked with, and we just got them to go outside 5 minutes, 3 times a day. Guess what? Their sleep got better. Everything got better. They didn't have to move to Florida. They didn't have to move to the equator. That's all it took for them to get better. So don't let perfect be the enemy of good.
Love it.
But people will be like, you have to leave your country. You have to do this. And wonderful. That's great. But it's not true for everybody.
Yeah.
So control what you can control. And there are some, like if I had terminal cancer, I probably would move to the Yucatan Peninsula. I probably would sit in a cenote all day. Why
I'm
not?
glad you brought that up. Yeah.
Right. So, but if you've got some issues, it doesn't mean you have to burn your whole life down.
No.
Right. Because I would say me being here in Nicaragua is a net positive, but it's not as positive as I thought it was going to be. It's a net positive because it's a lower cost of living. I can travel on my motorcycle a lot because my housekeeper is so cheap. It's ridiculous. They can look after my dogs while I'm gone. In the States, I couldn't take longer trips because, gosh, it costs as much to board the dog as it does to go on the trip, right?
Right.
Learning how to speak a new language, going to a community where you don't know anybody, that's extremely stressful, even though I've done it a number of times in my life.
Mhm.
So it's a wash, and it's a slight positive for me. Now, if I had a family that came with me, that would make it easier. So I just want to put caution out there for people to think, control what you control, do all those things first before you make any extreme moves, because you could find yourself in a very miserable situation.
That was one thing that helped. I was, parents were military. My dad was military, Army brat. I'm an Army brat. I was military. My husband was military. And when we moved a lot, but we moved to a community. We had people, when we had our babies for a month, we had people bringing meals over to us. Because we didn't have families. And so that's, it would be interesting to look at your life, if you had moved down there with a partner, a loving partner who you're,
Sure.
snuggled in bed with every day, every night.
Right.
And it'd be
Well, that's available, but it's not in the same context. There's
Go
too
there.
many. There's too many options here. Let's put it that way.
We won't go there.
Yeah, we don't need to go there. You can get yourself in a lot of trouble here if you're not careful.
Oh goodness.
I have good boundaries.
We know you're a wonderful person because we had Jackie Jolie on the podcast.
Oh yes, Miss
And
Jolie.
we adore her, and we know you guys are good friends. How did you guys
Yeah.
meet? Can you give us a little quick? How did you ever meet and connect?
I met Jackie when I was working at a CrossFit, and she was just beating the living crap out of herself. And I was like, girl, and typical, just my typical client, female, working really hard, running, doing all the aerobics, training like a maniac. I'm like, we need to lift some weights. We need to get you slow down a little bit. You need to take care of yourself. And she sort of bought into it. And I was able to get her in a much better place, got her stronger, got her taking care of herself. And so we hung out for a couple years, and then she went off, moved away, but we just been friends for a very, very long time. We both kind of check on each other from time to time, and we both kind of keep each other accountable. So and I kind of got her into the quantum world. She was really struggling with some Lyme stuff, and I was like, I taught you all these other things about food and about rest and about lifting, but you really need to get outside. And so I took her to a Jack Cruz event on the 4th of July one time. She went with me, and she dove in head first. And so That's how she got into what she's doing now.
Now she's helping a ton of animals.
Yes, she loves the animals. So yeah, we still talk all the time. She's one of my dear friends.
Okay, you mentioned supplements or sorry, food, rest, lifestyle. lifting, I guess. Something I want to, yeah, I've heard you say. Can you talk to us about and why it's not necessarily the most important? And you've used a lawnmower analogy in the past. I don't know if you can remember that analogy that probably just came out of the blue for you,
Well, I
but
mean, your mitochondria is, and that's one of the things the quantum world has really brought into account is, your engine is very important, right? If your mitochondria are sick, if you have a lawnmower, it doesn't really matter, but really anything else. I won't go to the extreme and say that what you eat doesn't matter, because I've spent the last year in Nicaragua when I first moved here. I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to be that tool that goes into the restaurant and says, no, I don't want the tortillas. I don't want the gala pinto, which is rice and beans. And I don't want the plantains. Because every meal here is like, I have to order extra protein. Every meal here is like 90% carbohydrates. And it's just, I'm like, you know what? I'm getting a ton of sun for the next year. I'm just going to eat whatever they serve me. Right. And I would order extra protein. But after a year of that, and rightly so, surprisingly, I haven't gained a lot of body fat. One, because I have a ton of muscle mass, but I think the sun offsets a lot of that. But I don't feel my best, and so I have gone back to like, okay, I'm going to eat more protein, I'm going to eat vegetables, and I'm going to have a moderate amount of carbohydrates. I'm not going to have every meal have rice and beans, tortillas, and plantains. Like I've cut. They look at me really funny. I'm like, I want churrasco, I want some vegetables, and I want a little bit of potatoes, like that much. And they're like, whoa, what's wrong with you? You don't want the gala pinto? Because they eat the majority of the diet here is carbohydrates. So I won't say that what you eat doesn't matter, but your environment, your sleep is more important, but you need certain nutrients for that system to work better as well. So it's a combination of both. And I think if your circadian rhythm is broken and you're not in a good place and your system, your mitochondria isn't working well, you're going to crave more sugary things. You're going to crave more garbage to help emergency fuel your system, which isn't as efficient, right? So I try not to get caught up. I just tell people eat good stuff, protein, vegetables, moderate amount of starch. If it's the middle of winter, you probably don't need to be eating a ton of carbohydrates. If you live in the tropics, whatever, you can eat a little more carbs. If you're working out really hard, you can eat some carbs after you train. Some of these, I ate tons of seafood for a long time. I got burned out on it. I still eat some seafood, but I was eating like oysters every day, shrimp every day, like tons and tons and I just got burned out. So I like something like the vertical diet, which is a nice balanced approach. It gives them reasonable food choices. I tell people to rotate seasonally. I tell people to make an effort to get your circadian rhythm, get the lights off at night. We need to make things sustainable for people. And we don't need to make things so difficult and so absolute that people aren't just going to do anything. They're just going to say, screw it, I'm not going to do it at all. Or they're going to get so, they're going to go out somewhere and they're going to get so bent out of shape that it's not perfect, that they're going to create more stress than actually eating the thing that's not perfect. So I work with people all the time, and I've worked with people for the last 30 years. I have to give people something that's sustainable and practical. And so that's kind of where I draw the line. But getting your engine in a good place, and part of that is having a good cardiovascular system, being able to breathe through your nose in a relaxed state, that allows your body to produce energy more efficiently. When you lose the ability to breathe and calmly and normally, and you're in an over-breathing state, you're just not as efficient at creating energy. And that creates a whole nother, I'm not into the technical, I work with real people every day. I don't talk about, electron transport chains and all that kind of stuff, because I stick more to the big principles. And, by getting people outside, we're improving their redox. By getting people, I talk about the stress bathtub, which is kind of like redox. Like if you've got like stress in a relationship, you're training too much, you're working too much, you're not getting outside enough, the bathtub spills over, right? You got bad redox. The things you do to improve your redox or empty your bathtub is the appropriate amount of exercise, getting outside, getting the lights off at night, doing some calm meditation, eating the right, eating good whole foods. That makes your bathtub bigger, or it empties the bathtub so you can handle more stress. If I start talking about electron transport chains and calcium pumps and this and that and this and that, people they glaze over and they're lost. They're so confused already. All the 5 fundamental habits that I preach, improve the redox. It improves the body's ability to make a bigger engine. to be more efficient. So I try not to get people any more confused than they already are.
Yeah, and I've seen Jim in the groups because I was a part of Dr. Stillman's group at the beginning of the year, and you do a great job of keeping things at a level that is easily understood. Yeah, we don't need to go into
Thank you.
the science of electron tunneling and all of that for people to
Right.
understand what they need to do. Because at the end of the day, that's what people,
Right.
really want is they want to know what to do. So speaking of that, I'd love to ask you, what are the mistakes that you see people make the most often? Like, what are you correcting most often?
Compliance and just doing it. Like most people make it so complicated that they don't do anything. And then worrying about the minutia. Get the big rocks first, right first. Then you can worry about some of these other things. Like, before you start freaking out about EMF, unplug your Wi-Fi router at night. Try and see if that helps. That's something really practical and simple you can do.
Mm-hmm.
Before you get $20,000 worth of mold testing, why don't you have your kids go outside most of the day instead of spending, I had one kid who had alopecia and they were afraid they had mold. And I was just like, how much time is your kid spending inside? Well, they're inside about 6 to 8 hours a day playing video games. And I was like, well, let's start with getting them outside. Let's start by, getting them off the cereal. Let's start by these things. We don't need to worry about getting all this mold testing until after this is all, we deal with the basics. And sure enough, the kids started getting outside more. They're like, we notice in the summer it's not as bad. Well, there you go. More sun. Like, how do I get my child to go outside? Go play with them, right? And so they would go play with the kid outside. How do I get my child to eat better? Well, you need to eat better too. And so the whole family started doing this. The whole family started getting healthier, and they, got outside. All of a sudden, his alopecia went away within like 2 months. And they found out later they had a mild mold issue, but they took care of. And I had another gentleman who, highly successful businessman, highly stressed, was in a really bad place. This goes to show you the mental, like like your mind, how powerful it is. He got into a really good place, and then he, for whatever reason, had a mold test, and he found out. We took him from like being in a really bad place to being in a really good place. He found out he's in Louisiana. Of course, there's mold everywhere in Louisiana. There's mold here everywhere. Like there's one of my podcast, one of my stands for my phone has mold growing on it that I had to like nuke it.
Oh,
It just grows everywhere here because it's in the rainy season. It is damp and there's nothing you can do. So this guy, for like 6 to 8 months, we'd taken him from, he had managed stress with his relationships. He had downsized his business. He was doing phenomenally well. Then he got a mold test and he figured out he had a certain strain of mold that wasn't the greatest. And all of a sudden his health, just after he learned that, his health went straight down. So I'm not saying mold isn't a thing or Lyme isn't a thing, but people focus on the illness or the challenge as opposed to just focusing on their wellness. And EMF, all these things, they are, I try to do everything. Like, that's why I wear the Aura Ring in airplane mode. I put the phone in airplane mode when I put it in my pocket. I'm out here on the balcony. I believe these things are important, but you don't want to make them a bigger monster than they are. Right. And so a lot of times when people are basically fed this fear stuff, it might become a bigger problem than it would have been if they didn't even know about it. Right. So the human mind is very powerful. So control the things you can control. And then once you get all the basics in place, see how you feel. And then you can start exploring some of these rabbit holes. And sometimes the mold is so bad that it's the obvious thing. It's growing out of your air conditioning duct. Okay, we definitely need to take care of that. Or you're living in an apartment complex where the whole place has just been painted and you've got this horrible allergy and you got headaches from it. We go to another building, the headaches go away. That's obvious when that kind of stuff needs to be taken care of. But, start with the basic 5 fundamentals. Start with that first. Start with learning how to relax and calm down. Start with, like, maybe you're not doing the right exercise program. Start with the low-hanging fruit before you, hire a crane to come to your house and climb to the top of the tree to pick the fruit that's at the top of the tree, right?
Yeah.
And then don't make the boogeymans bigger than they need to be, So it's a mental fear and that's part of the problem with social media is there's so much fear porn now that gets people just riled up about stuff. And a lot of the calls, I'm like, you can't control that. Like, there's nothing you can do. Just, control your family, control the things you can worry about. And that's about all you can do, So that's kind of my take on all that stuff. But
Well, even for that, like, less time on social media, see what happens to your anxiety. Right?
yeah, I mean,
That's another
absolutely. I mean,
low-hanging fruit.
yeah, I mean, I've been on calls with so many people that would go on and on about this or that, and I'm like, you're just stressing yourself out, and you can't do anything about it.
Yep.
So, make your comment, observe it. If you want to get involved a little bit, go ahead. But, if you're going to run around all day stressing about this, it's just going to destroy your health, right? So control the things you can control, you know, have good relationships with the people around you. I'm by no means perfect myself, but you just got to be careful with absolutes because there's so many different factors involved with a lot of these things. Like you look at pain, for example, they took 1,000 people. I don't know the exact numbers in the study, but they took 1,000 people in pain and they put them in an MRI machine. And they took 1,000 people that didn't have pain and they put them in an MRI machine. There are people that had pain, like half the people that had pain had nothing structurally wrong with them on the MRI. And then they went to the other extreme where the people that didn't have pain, half of them were just completely jacked, like torn ACLs, rotator cuffs, slap tears, you name it, but they didn't have pain. So there's so many more factors to pain and to things like that in life than just usually one factor. That's why it's so important to have a good fundamental basis for health. And then basically, then you become a science experiment. One of the big mistakes I see is they're like, well, I'm doing this protocol and I'm trying high dose melatonin and I'm doing methylene blue and I'm doing this and I'm doing that. And I'm like, how do you know what's working? Right? If you're not doing the lifestyle stuff, those things are going to lose their therapeutic runway. It's just like training. Everybody needs to do basic fundamental things in their training, but there comes a time where a certain style of training is going to lose its ability to make you change in a positive way. So you might do methylene blue and it might make you better for 4 to 6 weeks, but what about after that? Like, what are you going to do? Mm-hmm. Right? Or, or if you take chlorine dioxide, that's really hot right now. Okay, you take chlorine dioxide, it cleans some things up, but if your underlying health is not good, whatever you're dealing with is going to either come back or it's going to come up and back in a different form.
Well, you just highlighted a huge problem that we have, Jim, and that's people who aren't doing these simple things, and then they come into the quantum space, they're listening to all this stuff, and before they actually have those good habits in place, they're taking the methylene blue or doing whatever because that's what they always have done. Like, let's grab a supplement and slap the supplement on it. Right?
Everybody's looking for the quick. It's human nature, right? Yeah. It's just like the kid that I train who's 15, 16 years old. He's in the most anabolic state he'll ever be in his life. And he's taking creatine and he's eating nothing but Snickers bars and pizza pockets. And he's not getting enough protein. He's not eating enough food. He's not sleeping. And he thinks the creatine is going to save him. And it's like, dude, like, you got to eat. Like, not that I'm against a kid taking creatine. It's harmless for them. But why? Or pre-workout, or like they're taking caffeine pills.
Well, it's kind of a waste of money too.
Yeah, it is. It's like, okay, you're 15 or 16 years old. If you have an energy problem, you have a sleep problem, right? So people are looking for quick fixes and they're running from one thing to the next. And if you're doing 4 things or 5 things, how do you know which one's working?
Exactly.
Right? If I do something, I like to try one thing and see if it moves the needle and then switch to something else. If anything, and if I do something, I usually do it for 8 to 12 weeks and then I take a break from it and then do something else or, whatever. But I don't really take much of anything at all other than I'm on hormone replacement from years of stupidity. But, and that was another thing. It was kind of I was told, and this is why you really got to be careful at absolutes. I was told if I got enough sun and enough cold, I wouldn't need to take hormone replacement anymore. But I've had probably more. I've had so many. I could tell you, like, I can't count the number of times I saw double when I was playing high school football and wrestling and hockey. I've probably had, I don't know how many concussions in my life, car accidents, motorcycle wrecks. And I did a significant amount of performance enhancing drugs from the time I was like 25 until I was in my mid 30s. And so I had to get on HRT, and I was told, hey, if you get enough sun, you get enough cold, you don't need to be on HRT. HRT is bad for you. Well, 2 months later, I'm at the doctor and I have a 0 testosterone level, 0. And I'm staring at my 45 caliber pistol on my counter.
Oh,
And it's
my
like,
God.
oh, I probably need to be on testosterone. So, these absolute statements like if you need to get enough sun, you don't have to take hormones, or you shouldn't take hormones, you know,
Yeah.
I bought into that, and it was not the case. It almost cost me my life.
And everybody's
So
an N of one too, right?
that is correct. And so I made some choices when I was younger that probably weren't the wisest, but now I have to deal with it. So I'm on a low dose testosterone replacement, and I feel great. All my markers are good. My organs, my heart, everything's in good shape. So for me, like, that advice was horrible, and it could have cost me my life. So I'm not a big fan of these like really bold absolute statements.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to pick a fight with anybody. And actually, I needed to hear that at the time. It was a great message for me, like, dude, you need to get outside. You're going to, and that was obviously true for me. But how much sun was enough? Could I have stayed in Kentucky? Maybe. I didn't like it because the winters were awful. In the wintertime, I'd have to go to the tanning bed 3 times a week for 5 minutes because I had such horrible seasonal affective disorder. So it wasn't the greatest environment. Florida was better. I was able to train people in person in Florida, so that might have been optimal for me. But who knows? Like, everybody's a little bit different. I've seen people get better with just eating a little more protein and walking outside 3 times a day. They don't have to go buy thousands of dollars of red light panels. Everybody's different,
Yeah.
so that's really the big thing, is like, you don't really know until you try, and start with the low hanging fruit, and then don't get caught up in the fancy schmancy stuff.
Jim, we
Um,
had a medical doctor who would volunteer to leave Victoria, which is,
Mhm.
in the winters only
Yeah.
overcast, rainy. And then she would come to Cold Lake, Alberta, which is blue skies, 300,
Yeah.
I don't know, 50 days of the year. And she would
Sure.
come for the Cold Lake winters every year because it helped her SAD, her seasonal affectiveness disorder. Just shows you.
Bright and sunny is bright and sunny no matter what the
Mm.
temperature. And,
yeah.
if Kentucky would have been, if Kentucky would have been more like Colorado or Montana, I might have stayed there, because I
Yeah.
love Glacier. I love
Mhm.
Wyoming. I
Mm.
love, being outside, hiking in the cold, that kind of stuff. So, you know,
Who
it's
knows
just,
what your next adventure is?
I don't know. I'm pretty happy down here at the moment. So once
Nice.
I've gotten to know more people, I'm really enjoying working online. Eventually, I'm going to figure out a way to work with some people in person. It's hard to do here. One of the things that they're really not fond of is gringos taking jobs from Nicas. So you got to be really
Mm.
careful, because there's not enough jobs here. There's too many employees and not enough jobs.
Mm.
So if you come here and you're working from outside the country and you're bringing money into the country, they love you. But if you like open a business and you take a job from a Nicaraguan, now if I was in one of the tourist areas and I just worked with gringos, most people get away with that. They don't really bother, because they're like, there's no real trainers here in Nicaragua that would really be able to train these people anyways, right? So that you can get away with that. But I don't like living in the gringo communities. I like living with the locals.
Mhm.
So that's kind of a catch 22. But I
Um,
like it here. I enjoy it. It's just very interesting. I've learned a lot. My expectations versus reality are a little different.
yeah.
Mhm.
We wanted to ask you about this idea of putting all our mitochondrial density into our
Mhm.
muscles,
Yeah.
especially after 40. We really wanted you
Hmm.
to touch on that, and yeah, I'll let you go for it.
There's trade-offs, right? Just
Mm-hmm.
like top fuel dragster in race in I don't know if you know much about cars, but the top fuel dragster, they have to rebuild the engine after every race. So I think this push towards gaining a ton of muscle is to make up for a sedentary lifestyle. I definitely think having more muscle is more positive than negative when it comes to aging, because you're just going to have a higher quality of life. But I think bodybuilding, powerlifting, things like that, it takes years off your life. I mean, I've taken years off my life. Who knows, 10 years? I don't know, maybe. I don't know. But I would agree, like, I tell people, if they want to live a long time, flirt with performance, don't marry it. And I married performance for a long time. Now,
Mm.
I am built like this naturally. I've just turbocharged it. So I think a good moderate strength training program is positive, but if you take it to the extremes of bodybuilding or high performance, you're going to take years off your life. I mean, that's just basically it. But you got to look, you want to live to 100 and not be able to get off the toilet? Like, I don't want to sign up for that, you know? So if I
Mhm.
have to if I have to exchange a little bit of lifespan for quality of life, I'm willing to do that. So it's up to the individual. But, you know,
Yeah.
most of the women that I've worked with, they do better when they gain a little bit of strength and muscle for their confidence, for their the way they feel about themselves. But people that live a long time turn into little old people. Like the people here in Nicaragua that are 90, I mean, they can do some really cool things. Like I got a 90-year-old guy next door who still rides his dirt bike up and down the road with his granddaughter on the back.
Hmm.
But he's tiny. He's 5'4" and he weighs about 160, right? The people that I met I used to go to the retirement homes in Canada when I was growing up because I was fascinated with World War I and World War II. The people that I met in those retirement homes were not physically impressive. You know, they went through the war and stuff, but the people that were 105, 110, they were tiny people and they were not overly muscled.
Right.
The people that live in these blue zones are not physical specimens. The people that are big, they don't live as long. Like your Shaquille O'Neals, your big basketball players, your football players, they die younger. So it's just a matter of who, like trade-offs. But me, even if I didn't lift weights, I'd still have a lot of muscle. Most of my muscles in my legs and my butt. So I don't know. You just have to kind of choose your poison and kind of
Yeah.
pick what you want to be. But definitely being a body, that's why all these bodybuilders are having a hard time. A lot of it is just they're not managing the performance enhancing drugs well, diuretics and things like that. And then they're having to stay lean year round. Like guys like Arnold, like back in the 70s, they would do a steroid cycle for 12 to 16 weeks to get ready for a competition. And they would come off for 12 to 16 weeks and they'd actually look more normal. They wouldn't have the veins sticking out everywhere. They wouldn't be as lean. They'd give their body a chance to recover and come back. And they spent most of their time was outside. You see pictures of Arnold and pumping iron. He's on the beach. He's playing on the beach. They're doing gymnastics on the beach. They're outside most of the time. They did a lot of workouts at outdoor Venice Beach. But but now because of Instagram, everybody thinks they have to look a certain way year round. So they're on drugs year round. Or, they're lifting, weights year round. They're not letting their body rest and recover. So it's a trade-off. If you want to
Hmm.
be a high performer, you're going to have more maintenance. You're going to have to fix your car more. If you drive like a Bugatti or like a Lamborghini or a Ferrari or even a Corvette, the tires are going to be more expensive. The maintenance is going to be more expensive. If you're a Camry or a Corolla, all you got to do is change the oil. Like you don't really have to do anything crazy unless you drive it like a fool. But the brakes are going to be cheaper, the tires are going to be cheaper, the rims are going to be cheaper. I mean, you look at like a Bugatti, you're looking at like $2,000, $3,000 a tire. So if you push performance, there's a cost. The only person that can decide if that is right or wrong for you is you.
Yep.
I
Well
think my
said.
favorite quote from this, there's been so many, but is just flirt with performance, don't marry it. My husband always jokes, he goes, I married a Ferrari. What's happening? Now that I'm
Yeah.
58, broken tibial plateau. Oh.
Yes. So that's what I generally tell people is like you should be able to do a few hard things, but like you don't need to be like Mark Sisson's a prime example of that. He just came out with his book like Walk. Here's a guy that chased performance and watched all his colleagues die of cancer and heart attacks, and he's like, lift weights, paddleboard, walk.
Mhm.
Yeah. I've been
If
doing
you're gonna
Pilates and
run,
walking and I feel so good. Like and yeah, I used to lift really heavy, trying to train to be in bikini competitions and was
oh,
hoping to
I've
be a
seen,
bodybuilder at some point and like I don't wish that now. Like I'm
I've
glad I didn't go
seen,
all the way there.
yeah, I've seen so many women get Hashimoto's from figure competitions. I have a friend of mine who he's an IBF pro. He's a pro, and he was really smart about how he managed himself. But his whole career is basically taking women that have over dieted and like reverse dieting them to get them back to where their thyroid's functioning well, their body's functioning well, and they can actually, they've dieted themselves down to like below 1,000 calories a day, and then they stop losing weight. And they have all sorts of problems. They actually have to go the opposite. It's
Mhm.
very interesting. Everybody's like, food doesn't matter, but there's context to everything. My
Yep.
friend Alan Kress is his name. He used to be my roommate. He talks about when you go into a phase where you're trying to lose body fat, you need to go into a maintenance phase or eat a slight surplus for the same amount of time that you spent dieting. So if you spend 12 to 16, 18 weeks restricting and really, cardio and trying to get leaner, which people do, you need to spend the same amount of time in the other direction. Eating in a slight surplus, not beating a crap out of yourself, allowing your body to find normal. And here's the thing too, like everybody thinks that like 6-pack abs is healthy. That's not the case. Most men do best between 8 and 15%. Most of my athletes that I've worked with, they get below 12, they lose power and performance. A lot of the athletes that I work with, we have to put weight on them, fat, because a lot of them get too lean. Women in particular, most women do well between 17 and 30%. Anything, and that's why you see most of the people that are shredded, they're on testosterone, they're on thyroid, because your body, when you get down to that lean, it's like, hey, we really need to have some reserves. I mean, body fat is a survival mechanism. We really need to have a little more reserves. We're going to start slowing things down and making you a little hungrier, and maybe so you can gain some fat. And, women start having, reproductive issues in that once they get down below 15%. Most women, some people can run around super ripped, very few. But we've got this thing in society that and I think a lot of people just give up. They're like, oh, I'm never going to look like that, so I'll just eat nachos and drink beer. If most people knew, I mean, over my 30-year career, I had, when I was in Lexington, probably about 10 or 15 people that I trained from like 40 into their 60s. And if you lift weights a couple times a week, it doesn't have to be crazy heavy. Just challenge yourself. If you walk 3 times, walk outside every day. If you make an effort to get the lights off at night, you eat real food, protein heavy, and you do something you like golf or something, like that's really it. Like, it's not that complicated. Most people think they have to train like a CrossFit athlete or a Navy SEAL in order to be healthy, and that's the furthest thing from the truth. If most people knew how easy it was to just feel good and look decent, and it's not that hard to look bad or look good now. I mean, just go to Walmart. You'll figure it out real fast. I talk about that with a lot of the women I train, because they have this expectation, especially as they get older, that, they have to look a certain way. And it's just like, anytime you feel bad about yourself, just go to Walmart and just walk around and look at the people out there, and you'd be like, whoa, I'm in way better shape than any of these people, and have a little more realistic expectation. But if most people understood that it's not that difficult, you don't have to starve yourself. You don't have to like do any kind of extreme training. You have to challenge yourself, but not anything crazy. And you can look good and feel good and sleep well and enjoy your life. But people have kind of bought into this, like, you've got to train like a Navy SEAL, you've got to train like an NFL athlete. Those people don't live very long,
Yeah. No, thank you for that. All right, we are at the end of our visit with you, and
Yes.
thank you so much. I want to ask you our signature question. What does quantum healthy mean to you?
It means having a good relationship with nature, but not a detrimental relationship with nature. I mean, I don't think like wearing loincloth and living in a teepee is very sustainable for most people. If you grew up like that, maybe you could handle it. But I spent a lot of time in the outdoors, especially when I grew up in Northern Canada. But that's not necessarily the way I want to live my life. So you've got people that are like, we need to go way primal. And it's like, there's disadvantages to that, right? So it's kind of like the performance with strength training. It's like you want to flirt with it, but you don't want to marry it. So it's like, use the technology, but don't let it use you. So put the phone in airplane mode, put it away at 8 o'clock. I'm able to travel all over the world and live in Nicaragua because of modern technology. I can talk with you, for you guys, which I've had a wonderful time. We got to find balance between like living like a caveman and then never going outside. There has to be somewhere slightly towards the caveman, but not so far towards the caveman where it's like, I mean, a lot of the modern conveniences are great, but just don't become a slave to them. That's the big challenge I have and that's like, after this call, I'm going to go for a walk here on my farm that I live on. I mean, it's, great, the motorcycle. So I'll go for a walk, and I'll lay down and do like a non-sleep deep rest. I'll slow my breathing down. I'll breathe through my nose. I don't think I have any more calls this afternoon, so I'll be able to go I like to do, I have a gymnastics mat, so I'll go over here and do some rolling around on the ground. But, you know, like there's this thing that all technology, like this kind of attitude that all technology is bad. There has to be a balance there, right? And are there things we could do to improve technology? Yeah, I mean, they're making screens. There's, you know, a certain company that Dr. Cruz started where, you know, they're making the screens so they don't affect your health in such a bad way. You know, I hardwire my computer. So there's simple things you can do to make things better. But you got to make time for silence. You got to make time for nature. So finding that right balance. Do you have to become like an Amish person? No, but you definitely don't want to be that like stock trader or that, you know, hedge fund manager that's doing nothing but, you know, being inside all day on 7 different devices. So that's what it means to me. It means having a good relationship with nature, but not to the point where it destroys my health.
Well said.
Yeah. Awesome.
I try to, you know, when I do these interviews, I really try to make people think for themselves. Because the thing you want to do is you want to make sure you make decisions that are in your best interests. You don't want, there's a lot of really, and I'm strong-willed and strong-minded too. And you get people that you got to do it this way. You got to do it. Take the time to sit down and think about it first. Okay. Is this good advice? Is this bad advice? Whose interest is this in? Is this just dogma? Have I done the low-hanging fruit first before I do anything extreme? And if you're in an extreme situation, you might need to do something extreme, right? But take the time and think about these things for yourself. Make sure you just don't blindly take someone's advice without processing it and taking ownership and then saying, okay, I'm going to do this because I've thought it through and I've spent time in silence. I've let it fester. And I think this is the best decision for me, because then you take ownership of it. And then you can say, well, I decided to do this, even though that person gave me the advice. Then you can be like, you know what? It wasn't the best decision for me. I'm going to make some changes, but always take the time to let this stuff fester and sit down and do all the low hanging fruit first before you start chasing rabbits down holes.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being
Thanks for
here,
having me on.
Laura. I know that you have a well curated thank you, I'm sure.
It's building like crazy here. But before I do that, first, we want to make sure we capture what are you offering for people? My understanding
Yeah.
is you have a YouTube channel and a podcast. Is that right?
I have a YouTube channel. I've been doing podcasts. I just did one with Coach Christopher Summer of Gymnastics Bodies. I just did one with Rob Wolf a while back.
Okay.
I've kind of steered most of my content towards 40-year-old plus men because it's really easy for me to do that. But you know, I have something called the Vitality Brotherhood, which is a community. I'm going to be starting the Vitality Sisterhood here soon. But I
Oh,
have a men's
yay.
coaching. I'm going to be, and basically what I do is I empower women to like put the oxygen mask on themselves first. Stop yo-yo dieting, stop exercising to exhaustion. That's kind of what my career has been built on, is helping women pretty much balance, so to speak. I have a men's coaching program that I'm launching in January, so you can check that out. If you go to the Vitality Brotherhood, it has recommended products. You can book a call with me. I do work individually with people. Actually, funny thing is, you know, Dr. Stillman sent out, I'm going to be working with Dr. Stillman soon, but we're going to be phasing me out of that. Dr. Stillman sent out an email telling people I'm going to be working with men. 90% of the people that responded were women. So that was kind of a huge wake-up call that I need to have a women's group too.
I think you do.
Yeah, so it's very interesting to say the least. But I have a couple prominent people, a couple prominent biohackers promoted my men's group, which I never expected. A guy named Jay Campbell, who's a peptide guy, a friend of mine, HRT guy, he promoted the group, and I had like 250 people sign up. And I wasn't expecting it to be like an advanced biohacking group. But the funny thing is they start asking me questions about, hey, what peptide should I be taking? And I'm just like, how's your sleep? Are you getting outside? And they're just like, what do you mean? And I'm like, no, I never go outside. I'm a lawyer. I work inside all day. Well, we really need to take care of this first before we start going on all the. So it's been interesting talking with these guys and beating them over the head with the basics. So that was kind of an interesting kind of turn of events. But I have a group where I'm going to be walking men through like either a total rebuild, or maybe they've been lifting a long time. Maybe they need to kind of change the way they're lifting, or they're a beginner. I've got that going on. And then I still work with people individually as well in for the
Okay.
next couple months, I'm going to be working with Dr. Stillman as well.
Well, Jim, I'll try to keep this short, but so much came up during this for me. Thank you for keeping it real.
You're welcome. I don't know any other way.
Beating us over the head with the basics. I just picked that one up. Sharing your journey and just all the lessons learned from that. A huge one is just reminding us to stop being zoo animals and the
Mhm.
low-hanging fruit,
Yeah.
to become real humans again. Something we're trying to do with this podcast is to simplify quantum health. And even myself, I coach people. I actually show them electron transport chain. I mean, with my cancer
Yeah.
clients, I feel I need
Mhm.
to. I need to get
Sure.
explain deuterium. But at the same time, I think I'm gonna write down your 5 fundamentals. It's gonna be one of my key, first client, the first time I work with them, I'm gonna, go through the basics again. I'm really thankful for that.
Well, a lot of the times, it depends who I'm working with. If it's somebody who really wants to know the details, I will point them in the right direction. I'll say, look, go look at this,
Mhm,
but don't get lost, right?
mhm.
Don't get distracted.
That's it, right?
But most people, if you're a coach, they just want to know, tell me what to do,
Yeah.
right? Like when I'm teaching someone a certain lift, they don't want to know every muscle and how it works. And some people do. Some people really need to know that. But most people are just like so busy and they're so overwhelmed already. They just like tell me what to do.
So,
Okay.
Yeah.
something
I've
I learned
noticed
from
that
you.
as well.
Yeah, and something I learned from you, you even just terminology, you've said like, let's talk about what we can add, and then we'll talk about subtractions. Like I've been
Yeah,
using stop and start. I feel like
yeah.
I'm gonna start adding,
I'm
do
not a
something
big
gentler.
I'm not a big advocate of subtracting things right away.
No.
I mean, obviously, if somebody's up at 2 o'clock in the morning on TikTok, that's the subtraction we
Mhm,
need to make.
for sure.
But by adding more protein, it's harder for you to eat junk, right?
Mhm.
So I like adding things like let's get outside
Mm,
3 times a day. You get outside in the morning, you get outside at lunch, you get outside in the evening, you start getting tired at night. Like it's
mhm.
so bright here and the sun goes down, we're going into summer here and the sun's going down at 5:30. It really messes. Like I don't know what to do with that. Like in the
Mhm.
summer, the sun doesn't go down in Edmonton until 11 o'clock.
I know.
And so my body's like, it's summer, but it's winter. It's like it doesn't know what to do. It's like
That's not
I think
confused.
I think that's part of the confusion. It's like it doesn't know. It's just all upside down, So I try to add things, and that automatically causes people. And part of it is just making someone more present. If you can get someone to be present, the chances of
Mm.
them inhaling a bag of potato chips or drinking 2 bottles of wine or eating 5 donuts becomes less of a factor because if you actually are present in the moment, the chances of you becoming compulsive in a human vacuum cleaner go down dramatically. And
Okay.
the healthier you are, the more
Yeah.
present you're going to be.
Okay.
Yep.
Andeea quote. That was huge, Jim. Yeah. I've actually never really heard that worded that way. So impactful. Just
Thank you.
back to thanking you on the fitness side. Thanks for your own evolution from being a gym rat, to encouraging everybody to do outdoor fitness. And
Well,
yeah, huge.
I still struggle. I find
Do you?
myself in the gym and like 2 weeks ago, I had somebody like challenge me who was younger. And of course, I couldn't help myself.
The ego
And I
came in.
did some things I
Oh
did some
no.
things I probably shouldn't have done, but I did fine. It was okay. But nice thing about here is all the gyms are essentially outdoor because they can't afford to have air conditioning and
Right.
all the windows are open.
Open.
So it's like working out outside anyways. But I love the gym. I have to be careful. I get pulled back into, lifting heavier things and I still love it and I still do it. I just do it in a little bit different way, just not at the extreme that I was
Mhm,
before.
mhm.
So it's a part of who I am.
And I really like that you're evolving even maybe ideas on, do we have to be that big? But again, like, thank you for explaining your
Yeah,
ideas
no
on
problem.
mitochondrial
Well,
density
I
and
just try to
everything.
challenge people's thought processes. That's what it's all about.
Mhm,
Because in
mhm.
the end of the day, it's your life. You have to decide what's best for you.
True enough.
And no one else has really the right to judge or to tell you. I mean, obviously, in certain situations, if the way you're acting is inappropriate or hurting someone else, that's a totally different animal. But in the end, it's your decision where you live. It's your decision how you live your life, and you have to deal with the consequences of it.
Thanks for challenging us and getting us to question things. And I'll just end with highlighting the need. I think that in this podcast, you really highlighted the need for connection and a little bit the relationship with ourselves.
Yeah. You can't go burning all your bridges and not expect to have negative consequences. And I'm afraid being outside does not cancel out no social connection for 90% of people.
Powerful.
Yeah, community is a huge thing in recovery, and that is something that I always talking about. So I loved how you put that on this, because speaking to those people as well. So there's just so much crossover. So thank you everyone for listening. Thank you so much, Jim, for being here, and we will see you next time.
Thank you so much for listening to the Quantum Healthy podcast. We hope you found some value in this information. And if you feel inspired, please share it and leave us a 5-star review. This will help us reach so many more people. If you want to connect with Laura, you can find her at laurakistmanwellness.com and Andeea at andeearay.com. Links are below in the show notes. Now, go find some sunlight and embrace your own quantum healthy.